methods that people are becoming very familiar with, we'll be able to update the red list and have people become owners of that information so that we can update it at the same time empower those that are interested. So things like these we hope to be the differences, the new things that come up, but I'm sure there are many more of these efforts going on around the world, so hearing from you about those would be excellent. Thank you. Next. You're next.
Okay. There is some repetition here. Obviously, Jonathan, John Paul, and I didn't all sit in the same room to prepare presentations. So some of these slides you will have heard about before, but I think that's really good because this really emphasizes the fact that the issues are real and the kinds of things that we need to address, they haven't changed in the recent past. So I'm going to talk a little bit about building capacity and support to strengthen the National Red Listing Network. I'm basically going to address three questions. The first is, why is there a need for capacity building and support? I think that John Paul and Jonathan have really built up the case for this already, but many people could argue that independently people could develop their own red list. So why do we want to increase communication and build capacity and support producing red lists at the national level? How do we develop national and regional capacity using the IUCN methodology? And there are a bunch of new tools that we have that have come out in the past couple of years for doing precisely that. And how do we support the National Red List Network? So this you've clearly seen before. I'll just highlight what John Paul mentioned earlier, and that's that there are very clear gaps in the National Red List Network, in the National Red List coverage, and these are taxonomic and geographic gaps. So here we clearly can see where there's a lack of red lists in general. These areas, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, are the areas with the highest levels of biodiversity and species richness. So it's clearly an issue that we don't know the status of biodiversity in these regions, and we need to build up the momentum so that national red lists can be developed for these countries so that we can help start to track the trends in these areas. There are taxonomic gaps in national red list coverage as well, and particularly for invertebrates and for fungi and lichen, you can see that even amongst the existing national red lists, a very low percentage of those red lists cover fungi and lichen and invertebrates. So it's important that we get this information so that we can then have the basic data that we need to develop the conservation action plans and to report back on the status of our biodiversity over time. This isn't a new issue. This is a paper that came out in 2000. John Paul and colleagues highlighted the disparities between national red lists and the IUCN red list. And this is something that clearly we've been talking about for a long time. And the issues still exist. There's a lot of data that's been produced at the national level that hasn't yet found its way to the global red list. And there's information on the global red list that isn't incorporated into national red lists. So since this paper came out, the situation has improved a lot, and we're really working hard to increase the communication between the national level and the global level. But building up capacity and building up the support is something that we hope will improve that situation. And in the IUCN Red List Unit, we really support the development of national red lists, and we're really working hard to try to improve communication between national red listers and the global red list. One of the biggest issues and challenges that I think needs to be addressed is there is a huge variety in assessment criteria that's used in different countries. Many countries produced, national red lists are nothing new. So the earliest national red list came out in the late 60s and the early 70s. So at that time there was no standardized system, and countries produced their own systems for assessing a species extinction risk. But since then, there has been an expansion of national red lists, and many different countries have produced their own systems, which aren't comparable. The advantage of having a standardized system used across countries is that you would be able to compare the data, you'd be gathering the same type of data, and you'd be able to compare those assessments because you'd be speaking the same language. As it is, a species that's endangered in one country and endangered in another country might actually have very different threat status because the definition of endangered means different things in each of those countries. So a couple of years ago, there was a paper that came out where they named different desirable characteristics in an assessment criteria system. And the IUCN, the latest IUCN system that was published in 2001 was identified as the system with the most desirable characteristics. And because it has been taken up by so many countries around the world, it's not just that I work for the Global Species Program, but it really is a standardized system that we can promote for people to tackle some of these issues about a lack of comparison. And if countries around the world were really using a standardized system, then we could help build more regional biodiversity conservation strategies and share data between countries. Jonathan and John Paul already discussed the Red List Index. This is a really important indicator for monitoring biodiversity trends towards the CBDIG targets and for reporting on national biodiversity strategies and action plans. John Paul showed the results from the Red List Index that was produced in Venezuela, and this is an example of Red List Index produced for Sweden. And you can see that Swedish biodiversity tends to be in a bit better state than Venezuelan biodiversity, but the situation is declining for some species groups. And this is the information that we really need to determine whether the actions that we're taking are sufficient and whether what we're doing is enough to really be making a difference. And the Red List Index, another advantage to using the IUCN Red List criteria system is that the Red List Index is obviously based on that system. A very sort of fundamental and basic question that comes up, and we get contacted in the IUCN Red List unit all the time with simple questions about how do you produce a national red list? There's interest all over the world, and which assessment criteria system you use and how you come up with the data and then how you build that into national conservation strategies is a big issue, but some very basic questions also come up all the time. How do you fund a national red list? What are the different roles and responsibilities, and what logistics need to take place? Do you hold workshops? Do you build a wiki site? How do you communicate the results to the red list? How do you then build those results into conservation policies? These are really basic questions that people have tackled independently in different countries, but any country that's new to red listing has. And if we can increase the communication between the different national red listers, it would really be beneficial to maximizing the strategies for doing this in an efficient way. So for the past couple of years, I've really been working on developing tools and resources to help improve access to training for an IUCN Red List methodology. So I'm just going to cover some of the things that we've produced. We have a web page on the IUCN Red List website that includes a whole series of training tools and resources that are available. It includes the categories and criteria and the regional guidelines, which as you can see is about to be, this isn't quite published yet, but it's about to be published. It's been revised. All of the different presentations and all of the different tools and resources that you need to do a national red list are available on the Red List training website. We've also been holding Red List training workshops. And over the past couple of years, we've worked really hard to improve the way that we deliver these workshops so that they're much more engaging and much more useful for the people who are learning how to use the methodology. This is just a map of where we've held Red List training workshops since September 2010. So over the past 2 years, we've had workshops all over the world. The drawback is that this is funding dependent, and we don't have a stable source of funding to really be able to provide these kinds of workshops easily and quickly, and that's why we need to look at alternative strategies for getting the information out there and providing this capacity building. But when the funding is there, then we have the ability to provide the workshops. One thing I want to highlight is that when you do training and when you're starting to embark on a national red list, it's really important that you have all of the steps in place before you start learning the system. Because if people learn the IUCN Red List methodology, and then a year goes by before they really get underway doing assessments, all of those details will be lost. There's a lot of knowledge and information that is involved in red listing that you need to learn, and if you can immediately pick that up and start doing assessments, then it really starts to flow. But just to highlight that it's important that you really start training the correct people who are going to be doing the assessments, and really once you're ready to get the biodiversity assessments underway. We also have a new IUCN Red List trainer training curriculum. So we have just in the past year started certifying our first batch of IUCN Red List trainers. And ideally we would like to expand this network as widely as possible. One of the biggest limitations to building capacity is the fact that up until recently there was a limited number of people who were really able to do Red List training and provide training workshops. And now we're trying to build that number and locate people all over the world, locate people who are doing global red listing and national red listing. So this is something that hopefully can really help to get momentum underway. Finally, we are developing an online red list training course. This is the URL, and you can just scan that QR code with your phones if you want to be taken straight to the page. This is going to be released at the end of the year. It's not quite finished yet, but we have opened it up during the Congress if you want to preview it. This is really a work in progress. It's just a draft, but we have 7 different modules that cover every element of red listing. The categories and criteria, the basic introduction to the red list and what it is, the IUCN red list mapping protocols, the documentation requirements for information that supports the red list assessment, how to do a regional red list assessment, and we also have a certification, the ability to receive an IUCN Red List Assessor Certificate. So if you take this course, or if you do a workshop and you go online and you pass the Red List Assessor exam, you can receive a certificate as an IUCN Red List Assessor. And this is something that basically proves that you've really put the time in to learn the entire methodology. And then if we get more people around the world with those certificates, then we can train those people to be trainers, and hopefully we can help build this Red List network. We're actually going to release this, or give more information and demo the course on Monday in the Species Pavilion at 1 o'clock if anyone's interested in learning more. And then, of course, the regional red list, regionalredlist.com or nationalredlist.com. I'm sorry, that's wrong, nationalredlist.org. This is a really fantastic resource, and we're really trying to build this up because this should be really the centralized place where people can go for information about national red lists, data from other national red lists, contacts for people that have done national red lists. If you have questions about how to do the process, you're looking for information from neighboring regions, this really should be the hub that can help bring this community together. We really want to build this up so that we can start increasing communication between national red listers in different countries and between the national and global red list. So just to summarize a little bit, how do we support the development of additional national red lists and the expansion of national red lists that have already been developed into new taxonomic groups? Well, one thing that we're working on through the IUCN Global Species Program is building capacity to use the regional red list methodology. We're open to ideas for how we can do this more efficiently, other ways that would be useful. I mean, we're developing the online course, we have this new training curriculum, but we'd like to hear from you what kinds of things you need, what kinds of information you're looking for, and where the stumbling blocks are to really get the process underway in terms of capacity building. I really think improving communication between the national red list processes in different countries and between national red lists and the IUCN red list is key to overcoming some of these challenges that we've encountered in the past decade or so. Sharing successful strategies for logistics, things like getting your assessment process underway, how to incorporate it into national policy, fundraising, and best practice on where you get the data and how you do the assessments. And then facilitating data sharing between neighboring regions is something that really happens as you get a network up and running. And that's something that will only benefit national red lists in different countries and the global red list. Because as the endemic species on national red lists grow, then we can get those onto the IUCN list, and we have a stronger tool to use at the global level. As the global red list grows, we can also help facilitate national red lists. So it's really a mutual beneficial, it's a symbiosis, if you will. And another idea that's come up recently is building regional red listing networks. And I know that this is something that has been in discussion for a long time, but there's a session on Monday in the Species Pavilion where we're presenting the idea to build a regional red list network for Latin America. And this is something that we would really encourage take place in other regions. This has been in discussion in Western Asia. This has been something that we've been trying to get up and running in other regions around the world. And this is really where people can come together and mutually support each other. So how we build those networks, what kind of support is provided by IUCN, what kind of support is provided mutually between the different countries is something that's totally up in the air. And we're really open to any sort of ideas you might have about how this could really help facilitate building the national red list around the world.
Okay, hi. So I'm Florian Kirchner. I'm working in the IUCN French committee in Paris, and I'm in charge of the species program in France. So sorry for my English. It's okay, but not great, but I hope you will understand everything. So the aim here is to talk to you about an example of a red list of endangered species that we have built in France. It's a project that is underway now, and the point is not to present you the results of the project, but more how we build it, how we proceed, and how we manage to influence national policies and strategies with the French red list of endangered species. So when we started this project, it was in 2007, so only 5 years ago, because you have to know that France didn't have any red list before that date, before 2007. So we decided to build a national red list, and our objectives were to assess the conservation status of species in France using IUCN criteria. We wanted to build a scientific tool delivering authoritative information, and we wanted to guide national strategy and policy on biodiversity. And the project was developed both for continental France and overseas territories, because you know that France territories occurs in the Atlantic with the Guadeloupe Island, in the Indian Ocean with La Réunion Island, also in the Pacific with French Polynesia and New Caledonia. So the territory where we want to assess species are all these territories, and mainland France is only one of these territories. So when you want to build a red list, what you need are different requirements. We had a big list with Rebecca before, and shortly we can say that you need a methodology, you need data, you will need to gather experts to assess the species, you will need funds, of course, which is in fact the first of these points you have to deal with. And important, you will need to link your red list project with the conservation and strategist policies at the national level. So I'm going to go through these points with the example that about what we've done in France. So the methodology, you have it, I don't need to talk about this. These two guides are ready to use, and you have everything in hand to assess species with the IUCN methodology. So now, how we managed to gather experts and data in France. We decided to build a partnership approach. So I'm working in the IUCN French committee, and in France we have an official organization that advises the French government on any issue on nature, which is the French Museum of Natural History. So at the start of the project we decided to work together. So the French Red List of Endangered Species is a joint project between the French Museum and the IUCN French Committee. And of course there are many scientists in the museum. There are also many scientists and specialists in our species commission in France, but we don't have both of us, we don't have all the expertise available in France or all the data. So we wanted to work with any key organization in France having either experts or data or both. So we invited many organizations in a meeting, we presented the project, and we invite everyone that wants to collaborate to the project. And now in this partnership, we have many organizations. Probably you don't know them, but these organizations that work with us, some of them are NGO, like LPO. LPO is the French representative of BirdLife in France. So we have different NGOs like this one. We also have in France many natural history society. For example, a natural history society on amphibians and reptiles, another one on orchids. There is another one on damselfly, for example. So these societies are not well known, but they gather many specialists in France on species. And we also, I don't want to cite them all, but we also want to work with public agencies like the French Office of Forest and the French Office of Wildlife, because these both agencies have a lot of data on nature in France. So these are the main partners of the project, help us to assess the species, and many others that I don't have time to cite here. And now to assess species, we need experts. So